Okay, now I get you're all wondering why we got you here. What is in fact we're doing? Well, not enough people know how hard we work. They all think it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll and wine, women, and song. Well, it is just that, actually.
He was the drummer and vocalist for the legendary rock band Genesis. His solo career led him to become a pop music icon and one of the world's best-selling artists. And he created the most famous drum break of all time. He could navigate super challenging arrangements and complex time signatures. He created grooves and fills that captivated drummers immediately. And he developed his own signature sound on the drums. So, was Phil Collins a drumming genius? That's the question. And if you don't think so, I believe I can convince you that he was by the end of this video. Let's get right into it. So we're talking about Phil's legendary drum fills, and to start off, we're going to talk about Easy Lover, which was a duet that Phil did with Philip Bailey of Earth, Wind & Fire. This is an iconic intro with a bunch of drum fills played by Phil Collins. Now, even though in that opening clip you saw Chester Thompson was playing it live, this is what Phil played on the record. All right, now for the one you've all been waiting for, the famous drum break from In the Air Tonight. And just in case you needed to hear it once more, the other cool thing about this drum part is you get to hear that classic gated drum sound, which Phil Collins became known for having. But what a lot of drummers don't realize is that this sound was actually developed on Peter Gabriel's track Intruder, which Phil Collins played drums on, and then they applied that technique to this famous recording of In the Air Tonight. And there's lots of videos on YouTube where you can see exactly how they get that gated drum sound. One other thing that was part of Phil's signature style of playing was maintaining a groove on the ride or on the crash while moving around the kit with his other hand. And Chester Thompson, who's been playing additional drums with Genesis and for Phil Collins solo tours since 1976, talks about this in a recent 2014 interview.
And so there would be things like he'd be just in the midst of a part of a song where he would naturally do it. Well, because I've spent a lot of years in playing multiple percussion instruments, you just develop a sense of, leading sort of, as opposed to one hand doing everything.
So you can hear this type of playing on tons of different Genesis and Phil Collins tracks, but a great example of this is on one of Phil's biggest hits, Against All Odds, where he plays triplets descending on the toms with one hand while playing consistent crashes with the other hand at the exact same time. Here are a few other drum fills that have Phil Collins' signature all over them. From Dance on a Volcano by Genesis, and Woman in Chains by Tears for Fears. Phil Collins was a master at playing in odd time signatures, as you just heard in that clip. That was from a Genesis track called Firth of Fifth off of Selling England by the Pound, and that particular section goes between 2/4 and 13/16, which is pretty crazy. But that's just one of many examples of his masterful odd time playing. Check out this section from the Cinema Show off of the same record where Phil's playing in 7/8. Now, while we're talking about Genesis in the 70s, we have to talk about the 23-minute masterpiece, Supper's Ready, off of Foxtrot, specifically the section called Apocalypse in 9/8. Let's listen to a section of the track, and then I'll show you the groove that you hear at the beginning of the clip. As we move into the 1980s, we start to hear Genesis music with more of a pop rock sound on records like Genesis and Abacab, but that doesn't mean they still weren't writing in odd time. Check out the verse section from their song Turn It On Again, which is in 13/4 or alternating bars of 6/4 and 7/4. So this groove is pretty simple, and it has this driving quarter note pulse, which you hear played on the kick. And this really gives us a great look into how Genesis and Phil Collins were writing music in the 80s and really taking influence from R&B and pop musicians. Here's a few other examples that showcase Phil Collins' mastery of odd time. The first is from the keyboard solo in Robbery, Assault, and Battery by Genesis, which is in 13/8. This next one is from Nuclear Burn by Phil's jazz fusion project Brand X, and this one has an intro in 11/8. So that was a classic Genesis track called Watcher of the Skies off of Foxtrot from 1972, and the groove that Phil is playing is instantly recognizable. Phil had a way of creating grooves that really had their own melody within them. The second you hear it, you know that it's a Phil Collins drum groove. This is what the 6/4 groove sounds like from Watcher of the Skies. All right, let's move ahead to the Duke record from 1980 and check out the signature Phil Collins groove from Behind the Lines, the opening track on the record and one of my personal favorite Genesis tracks. So of course we could go over so many other signature Phil Collins grooves because he created so many over his long career. But I want to show you one more here from the song I Don't Care Anymore, which was a huge hit from Phil's solo career. He could create signature drum parts, he had a one-of-a-kind sound, but another big part of what made Phil Collins so great was his technical proficiency on the kit. And that all started with him studying and practicing the instrument from a very young age. And by the time he was playing with Genesis, he had the ability to play drum parts that other drummers just weren't capable of playing. Just listen to songs like Los Endos and tell me this isn't an insane drum part. Now, that's not a groove that just any drummer can play. That's something that requires a high level of technique and endurance. And for any of you who are curious, that groove was actually inspired by what Phil heard on a Santana song called Promise of a Fisherman, played by Airto. Or take any of his work with Brand X, just listen to a song like Kugelblitz, which is just crazy. So that's pretty wild, right? And I can almost guarantee you didn't think you'd be hearing Phil Collins playing up-tempo swing in this video. But that really just goes to show how technical of a player Phil Collins was. Now, getting into some specifics, think about his snare drum playing on some of those older Genesis records. The press rolls on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Supper's Ready, or the articulate rudimental rolls in The Battle of Epping Forest, or The Cinema Show. Listen to this. Now, that just can't be played without a certain level of technique. And the same applies to Phil's bass drum playing. Check this out. It's on tracks like The Musical Box, where we hear Phil demonstrate pure precision when it comes to playing dense bass drum figures and challenging syncopated patterns, further proving his mastery of the drum kit. If you've ever listened to 80s Genesis records like Invisible Touch or their self-titled record from 1983, you've probably noticed that the drum sounds are quite a bit different from earlier Genesis records. And that's because at this point, Phil was fully integrating modern technology into the music he was creating. And in the 80s, that was primarily with Simmons electronic drums. So as you saw in that clip, Phil would have his Simmons kit set up over to the side, just like I have here, obviously with a whole bunch of other Simmons pads. And when he was soloing, he would sometimes be playing his acoustic kit and then reach over to the Simmons pads and kind of incorporate them into the solo that he was playing. There's a classic drum duet between Phil Collins and Chester Thompson from 1984, where Phil's using the Simmons pads while soloing from the front. So clearly there's a very different sound when he plays those Simmons drums compared to the acoustic drums. Another great example of Phil playing Simmons electronic drums is the song Tonight, Tonight, Tonight off of the Invisible Touch record from 1986. Now, according to Phil, on the second half of that song, he was just using stock sounds from the Simmons SDS7 module. On tracks like The Brazilian, Phil would even jump back to the electronic kit and do some double drumming with Chester Thompson. And there's a great clip of this from the 1987 Wembley concert where you can see this in action. There you have it, the genius of Phil Collins. Hopefully you learned a bit about Phil's unique playing style, and if you were already a fan of his playing, maybe you found a few new songs to check out as well. So before you go, let me know in the comments one thing that you've learned from listening to Phil Collins. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, because there's some other incredible content here on the Drumeo channel, including other breakdowns of drummers like Alex Van Halen, Neil Peart, Dave Grohl, and so many others. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.